Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Food Systems in Season. My name is Bill Lester. I'm with University of Florida IFAS Extension Service in Hernando County, and obviously I'm here with a lot of other people today. We invited all of our previous speakers to come back, and they're all here to answer any questions that you may have from our previous shows over the last couple of weeks. And we are going to discuss a little bit more about growing vegetables and seafood and aquaponics and hydroponics and bees and chickens, everything. So if any of you have any questions, please just go ahead and put them in the comments box. And now is the time to ask them when you have all the experts here to help answer them for you. So with that, Wendy, I'm just going to throw it right over to you.
Well, really quickly, I wanted to go ahead and introduce all of our experts just in case you weren't on their session or part of the series. So I'm Wendy Lynch. I'm a regional specialized agent in family consumer sciences and food systems in Central District. And I'll pass it up to Morgan.
Oh. You're on mute.
Darn it. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Pinkerton, and I'm with IFAS Extension in Seminole County. I'm the Sustainable Ag and Food Systems Agent, and I'll pass it over to Yilin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yilin Zhuang. I'm the Regional Specialized Agent in Water Resources, also in Central Florida. So I will pass it to my neighbor downstairs, Dr. Norma Samuel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Norma Samuel, and I am the Florida Friendly Landscaping and Urban Horticulture Agent with IFAS Extension in Sumter County, and I am passing it to Maxine.
Hi, guys. I'm Maxine Hunter, the IFAS Extension Agent in Marion County for Ag and Natural Resources, and happy to be here today. On to Brittany.
Hi, I'm Brittany. I am a marine agent with the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Hernando County in Florida Sea Grant.
And we had one extra expert, but
yeah, JK's having a little problem with his camera. I think, hey, there he is.
I'm JK Yarbrough, IFAS Livestock and Natural Resources Agent for in Seminole counties. And I have my camera off. The camera's on mobile today, so I don't want to give you all a headache. I'm messing with heifers this morning, but I'm happy to talk about bees and chickens all morning long.
Thanks, JK. Awesome. Well, if you missed any of our sessions, please go back and check it out on our YouTube channel. They were filled with information. I learned so much over the last, oh goodness, I guess it's been 5 weeks. So, but let's go ahead and kick off with our first question, which is this one. How can I tell when to harvest my vegetables?
So I'll be happy to answer that for you, Wendy. So that's a question that I commonly get from gardeners, especially people who are new to planting vegetables. They're like, how do I know when to harvest? For example, eggplants. They'll plant eggplants, but they don't know when to harvest. So you want to harvest your eggplant when it's shiny. And if you wait until the shine is off or it gets dull, then it's going to be a bit on the old side. It's not going to be as nice and white on the inside. You'll see the seeds start to turn brown and it's a bit coarser. So we do recommend you harvest those when they're shiny. Another metric that you can use is the days to harvest. So you kind of gauge yourself. If it says, 50 days to harvest, around that time you can use that as your guide. Sweet potato is one that people will plant and they don't know when to harvest them. And sweet potato usually takes about 4 months. So what I usually do is that around that time, I would find a root and I will pull away the soil and see what's under there at that point. And if it looks, the size that I think it should be, then I would harvest it. In terms of collards, for example, when I grow collards, I allow it to get to the days to harvest. And instead of taking the entire plant out, then I just harvest the lower leaves. And if you do that, the collards can withstand some heat. So it will take you all the way, sometimes to April, May. The only thing you have to worry about at that point in time is getting insect problems, because as the weather warms up, you get more insect problems. So those are just some tips.
Okay, Wendy, we have a question from the audience here, and this is
All right.
one from Maxine, and this might be a little tricky because I'm not really sure what the proper answer is, but I'm sure Maxine knows. So William Combs asks, for aquaponics, why do you not suggest strawberries be grown in it?
So that's a great question, and it's not a super simple answer. There's a variety of different reasons. One, there's some very specific pests that like strawberries, and so pest control can be very difficult with aquaponic systems. And additionally, your fruit may hang down, so depending on the type of system that you have, you would want to make sure that your fruit does not ever touch the aquaponic water. That's a biggie for food safety purposes. And there's a few others I could think of as far as like making sure your strawberries are getting the nutrients they need, as well as keeping the pH for strawberries available. So strawberries don't like to be that wet. So it's just a really difficult balancing act with strawberries. But I think the pest management concern is probably the bigger of those.
Okay, and I think we got one for Norma here also. So PJ wants to know, with pineapples, how do you know when pineapples are ready? And I know you can grow pineapples very easily here in Central Florida. We even have a class coming up in about a month or so on pineapples. So how do you deal with pineapples?
Yeah, so you can grow pineapples here in Central Florida. The thing with pineapples is that you have to be very patient. So it will be about 18 to 24 months before you have pineapples that are ready to harvest. So I usually gauge them by when the color of the pineapple starts to change. So it will change from, the grayish, greenish color that it is to begin to see some yellow. So I usually wait for it to start to change color before I harvest.
I have a follow-up question to that. How do you keep sneaky creatures from running away with the pineapple before it's ready? That's my biggest issue.
Well, Morgan, the thing about, gardening for food crops is that you have to plant enough for you and the critters, so
Gotcha.
Sometimes they're going to win and you're going to lose, and vice versa. So it's just something that you have to, keep in mind. Squirrels are also ones that are a big problem, and rabbits. So it's trying to do things that will deter them. So birds can be a problem. So I don't have bird feeders in my yard, but I do get a lot of birds. But if you have bird feeders, they're going to attract, birds, and then those can be eating your tomatoes or whatever. But it's just planting enough for you and nature.
Yeah, and I
That's
think
great
bird feeders
feedback.
can attract squirrels a lot of times also.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Wendy, what do you think our next question should be? Who should it be for?
Let's see. The next question we've got is, let's go with, is it safe to eat scallops during a red tide bloom? So I'm going to guess that one is for Brittany.
Yes, ma'am, I can answer that one. So scallops are filter feeders, and that means that they are going to take any of the particles out of the water and eat them. Scallops in particular in the Gulf of Mexico, if there's a red tide bloom, they are going to then collect all of those red tide algae cells, and they will be in the gut. So it won't be in the white tissue that you typically harvest, but if you eat the scallop whole, you are then eating those red tide toxins. So it can make you sick. It is a neurotoxin. So it's recommended that if there's a red tide bloom out there, to avoid scalloping in that area.
All right, we got another question from the audience here. And I guess this is kind of for several people, but mostly Norma. Are there any food plants that can't be grown in containers?
I practically grow most of my vegetables in containers. I think the critical thing when you're growing in containers is making sure you have holes for drainage and the size of the container is appropriate for what you're growing. But anything that I grow or you can grow here as a vegetable, you can grow in container. You can also grow some fruit trees in containers. So people who try to grow like mangoes and avocados, and those are not really, Central Florida type crops, then they would put them in huge containers on casters and wheel them in and out. But for me, that's a lot of work. So I don't really bother with that stuff. But you can pretty much, grow certain things in containers. Yeah.
I think I've seen pretty much every kind of vegetable grown in a container. You can even grow corn in 5-gallon buckets.
I grew a serious sweet potato, Bill. It was the size of my laptop.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yes. Sweet potatoes do very well in containers. Yes.
That was the trick I learned when I first joined Extension, to grow sweet potatoes in containers. That I felt like it was just so neat, so easy.
They're really easy. I've grown them once before, and they don't take a lot of care. They don't take a lot of extra water, not a lot of extra fertilizer. You just plant them in the spring, let them go all summer long. They'll grow like crazy and do just fine. And as long as you don't have any pest problems, there's a couple pests that could be a problem. You'll get sweet potatoes by the fall. Very, very easy.
Yeah.
But I think we got another one for Brittany here about red tide. How long will red tide toxin effects be in shellfish and fish in general?
I'm not sure about the shellfish, how long it will stay. FDAX is in charge of doing the testing of the tissues, and they will usually open the fishery when it's safe. Fish in general aren't going to, fish are going to be safe to eat. It's not going to be in their tissues. Of course, like you're not going to eat the tamale that will have those red tide toxins, but fish aren't going to have the red tide in the tissue, so that'll be safe to eat. And then I should probably mention too, if you're buying that scallop or seafood from a store, that's going to be safe to eat too. It's specifically scallops that you're going to go and harvest within a red tide area.
Okay, we're starting to get some really good questions here. And this one can probably be commented on by a number of people here. William says, I have a compost pile that I put my chicken manure and wood chips in. I have volunteer vegetables growing it, like pumpkins. Are they safe to eat, or would I be at risk of salmonella?
So I think we could pass that to JK, since he hasn't answered anything yet.
Sure. So, William, it sounds like you got a little bit different kind of compost pile here. So the vegetables that are growing in there are probably growing out of what has already been composted. And so they're growing on top, and chances are yes, they are safe to eat. But if it's a natural compost pile, you're probably going to be turning that pile by the time they're ready to eat anyway. So if it's a natural compost pile, you're not going to be eating out of it anyway. However, if you just let it sit and you let your pumpkins grow on it, if the pumpkins do grow on the top side, you should be okay, but the chances are they're going to vine out some and grow outside of that compost pile, and they'll for sure be safe. So kind of a two-way question. Chances are you're going to be turning those vegetables under anyway. If it's a true compost pile, if you're just letting it sit and it's already composted, then it's fine to let it grow those vegetables and eat from them.
We have any food safety experts here want to talk about salmonella in chicken manure?
I can talk about, I don't usually talk about it in chicken manure, but we can talk about salmonella in food risk. I would probably recommend going to the USDA food safety site. They have a lot of resources, which I shared in our session there. But just in case those folks if you couldn't hear JK real well, he was talking about, and you guys help me out here, about the compost pile being natural compost pile. So you're going to be turning it a lot, but if it's on the top and you haven't been turning it, then it's probably safe to eat. Is that what I heard you guys?
So you should be turning that compost pile regularly is really what we're getting at. If you have stuff growing, you might not be turning the pile regularly enough, because to truly get everything well composted, turning is important to make sure everything breaks down, as well as the heat that's inside the center of the compost is going to be different than on the outsides and underneath. So for like proper breakdown process in your composting and to get really well composted stuff, you should be turning anyways. And you won't really have much growing in that if you're moving it around, because the roots don't like to be disturbed on those plants.
Yeah, and chicken manure is very high in nitrogen. Wood chips are very high in carbon, so it's a good mixture.
Mhm.
It just has to be turned on a regular basis and allowed to get really hot as it's composting, and that's going to make it safer once you add it back to your garden soil and grow vegetables in it then. So you can do that safely.
So can I ask Yelin a question that I regularly get? So Yelin, as the water person, a question that I regularly get that people here may want an answer to is if it's safe to use reclaimed water in your vegetable garden.
That's a really good question here. I think Wednesday I did a talk also on reclaimed water. That was the question asked. So first, it's if you're not familiar with reclaimed water. So if you have a residential household with purple pipes, all the water inside is reclaimed water. And the reclaimed water is household wastewater, goes through the advanced wastewater treatment and the further disinfection to make sure the water quality is within the reclaimed water standard, then delivered to household. It sounds very vague here, but the idea for reclaimed water is to save potable water and use that reclaimed water for irrigation. Generally, we suggest to use reclaimed water for ornamental plants. So when it comes to edibles, then it really depends. So depends how you water your vegetables. So if you water your vegetables, like if reclaimed water touch the leaves, then you want to make sure you fully cooked and thermally processed your food before eating it. And if you use reclaimed water, only touch the roots, then that food may be safe to eat without a further process. So let's just take example for lettuce. Even you just water the roots, so it may still get water. So it's just like, can you guarantee the water hasn't touched your leaf? If you cannot guarantee that, that lettuce, you probably don't want to use that for salad. Another example is if you use reclaimed water for bananas, then you touch you use indirect irrigation. In other words, only the root area. And for your bananas, it need to be peeled, so you don't eat it directly. It can be safe to drink. So I think the bottom line here is the application method. If it's direct, then you want to cook and process the food before eating it.
Thank you.
Okay, and we got another question here for Yelin. PJ says, after listening to Yelin talk about septic nitrogen and the lack of oxygen in the system, I've been thinking about this a lot. Can adding a bottle of hydrogen peroxide add oxygen? Can it hurt?
That's a really good question. So first, it's the primary purpose for septic systems is for bacteria, to kill all the bacteria. And to kill the bacteria, you want to make sure it's an anaerobic condition without oxygen. So like if you add a bottle of hydrogen peroxide, it doesn't create enough oxygen environment, and B, for remove nitrogen, it has to have two phases. One phase is nitrification. So to go through denitrification, to remove nitrogen, you need to go through the first phase. It's a nitrification. So make it with enough oxygen to nitrify it. And then you go through another process to convert all the nutrient to nitrogen, oxygen, and release it. So if you mix it all together, you won't achieve either purpose. Did that answer your question here?
I know think so. I'm sure PJ, you can post follow-up questions on there. And
yes.
She does have kind of a follow-up question with rainwater. Can you use rainwater in foods and in laundry washing? Is it safe?
So for Florida building code, it's if you pipe in any rainwater into the household, you have to treat it. And that treat, it doesn't have to be sophisticated water treatment. It can be just like some filters, or it depends. So usually it requires filters. But generally speaking, rainwater, because if you use laundry, then you need to pipe it in. So you have to treat it. You have filter, you have disinfection. And also rainwater contains, especially the first 15 minutes rainfall, it has hydrogen sulfide, it has these elements in the air and get dissolved into the rainwater. So it's not suggested to use it to wash, like to process food. And do we have any food safety experts? I know Maxine has experience in that, and probably Wendy also has experience in that.
Well, I posted a link to CDC information on Salmonella. If anybody's not familiar with what Salmonella is and how to avoid it, you don't want to get it. It'll make you really sick. And I got a question for Norma here. What kind of dirt or soil, we don't say dirt, we say soil, is good for container gardening?
So Susan, I generally buy a good potting mix. I can't tell you specific brands on this show, but visit your local garden center or big box store and look for those potting mix that feeds over a long time. So they may say, feeds for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So I usually buy the one that feeds for the longest amount of time. And so that way I can have that, without having to apply any fertilizers. Now, most of your crops are going to be in for around close to 3 to 4 months. So if you get the 4 month or 6 month, whatever time frame they have, that would be good.
Okay, we have one here for JK. A chicken question, or more chicken manure question, I guess. PJ says, I've always wanted a sleigh chicken coop on high wheels to get chicken coop all over the yard or parts of a garden and eat bugs all over. Is that safe for all concerned?
All right, so mobile chicken coop or the chicken tractor system is definitely not the new one, but it's definitely still a very viable and useful tool. It depends on where we're allowed to keep our chickens. If we're in a backyard chicken ordinance area, and that's in a residential area, that's usually not allowed because we have to have our coop anchored down and secured. And in our residential areas, we don't usually have enough room to make it viable for them to actually move around, or else you just have for backyard with no grass. If we have on agricultural property and we have a little bit more room, a chicken tractor system is definitely a doable process. I would not so sure I would want to move it around the garden so much. We should recommend you compost chicken manure if possible first. That way you're killing off any kind of dangerous bacteria but it's a good way to spread nutrients around a pasture situation if you have that as an option as well. So yeah, the mobile chicken is definitely a system. It just takes a little bit more foresight to make sure you build the proper mobile unit. So are you making it just a coop that's mobile and you're letting them free range? Or are you making the coop in a chicken run that's mobile so that way they're always contained? There's a couple of different options you can choose from. But no matter what you choose, the mobile chicken system will always be inherently at a slightly higher risk of predator species, because since the coop is mobile, you don't have any wire barrier underneath the ground, so burrowing species will always be able to get up and underneath and into the coop possible. You can still lock them inside of the coop, depending on how you build it structurally speaking. So you just inherently always have a little bit higher risk of predation, but depending upon your system, that might be a risk that you're willing to take.
Okay, great. Let's get a question here from somebody who hasn't asked one yet. So Georgette, I guess this is for Norma. How often do you have to replace soil in your pots?
So for my vegetable garden, I usually use my soil for the entire year. So I would plant in the spring, and then I do a fall/winter crop. And then I would take that soil and then amend my flower beds with it. So you don't want to be planting in the same soil continuously because you end up having disease problems. And the other thing that I generally do when I change out the soil is that I rinse out my pots with a 10% bleach solution. So 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. So that way I'm, preventing any diseases from, being in those containers for a long time.
Okay, and we have kind of a follow-up question about the pumpkins and the compost and the chicken manure. William says, regarding my pumpkins, my compost that I turned is full. The pumpkins are growing where I dump my chicken waste away from everything. They create more waste than my little bin can keep up with. Sounds like you need to plan on building a bigger compost bin, or maybe one of the 3-bin systems, which I used to have one. It worked great. So chances are the chicken waste that the pumpkins are growing in, you still want to turn, because if you're taking that out of a chicken coop, it's a combination of the chicken waste and whatever kind of wood shavings you might use in it. And JK can kind of help correct me if I'm wrong. I am not the chicken raising expert here.
You're doing perfectly, Bill. That's exactly right. So yeah, that chicken manure, we want to make sure it gets good and composted. So if that's where they're really growing out of that, I mean, pumpkins are pretty easy to grow, and they're growing in there because it's so nutrient rich. So if they're growing in the straight manure and straight waste, once they get composted, they'll grow in that as well. So I would just go ahead and turn that under and plant the seeds later on and use that as full, not just straight chicken manure.
Okay, and if you do have little pumpkin plants popping up, you can try transplanting them to your regular garden area when they're small. You can do that.
Bill, we're getting an echo from you. I do not know how to share in the chat for them to see, but you may want to put something in on the 3-bin compost system for them.
Okay, well, if Wendy wants to ask a question or two here, I'll go ahead and start sharing some of the links for everybody to see.
Will do. So there is one on, do I have to have a boat to go scalloping? So that's a Brittany question.
Most areas that are open to legal harvest, yes. I know in the past people tell stories about being able to walk off the shoreline and go find scallops. You might be able to do that in some of the panhandle area if you have a house right there in the marshes. But in general, yes, you're going to need a boat.
I have a chicken question for JK. So actually, I'm asking that on the behalf of my aunt. My aunt has had quite a bit of chickens. So just one morning, all the chicken just died. So she was not aware of that, didn't see any symptoms. So this just made me wonder, how can we make sure, what signs we need to look for they are healthy and to prevent the disease.
Okay, so when it comes to backyard poses, they are really, really rare. Do occasionally happen. To have that great a mortality rate, it's hard to say what exactly caused it. So signs that ahead of time are going to be a couple of things. We look for any sort of nasal discharges, eyes kind of crusting over with other bacterial diseases that are really contagious that spread, and they start by having some crusty eyes. If they're acting kind of mopey or depressed, hanging out into the corner of the coop, not acting their normal behavior, is big indicators. Depending on the age of the birds, sometimes they might have Merrick's disease, which causes paralysis of the limbs at an early stage in life. So depending on where you get your chicken, if you get them first from a certified natural poultry breeder, you can get them vaccinated against some of those diseases with chicks. But when we just get chicks from our backyard breeders and things like that, they're not always going to be vaccinated. But again, because the occurrence of diseases are so usually rare, we don't usually have to worry about them. But again, try to get them through a national poultry breeder. You can kind of avoid some of those situations. As far as preventing diseases and stuff like that, our biggest tool that we can use is just provide them with plenty of ample space. Whenever we deal with backyard chickens, we keep them in coops often, and we keep them in the chicken run. So depending on the size that we're allowed to build to, I generally recommend you build to the maximum that you're allowed to build your coop and your run to. Because the tighter the animals are together, the more waste gets, the more they're around you. It just increases the chances of contaminants being spread. Whereas if we allow them to have as much room as we can give them, when they're on the open air or have some wind flow happening, we're going to decrease some of those chances of spreading disease. So it's hard to say for sure. I will say that we do have a really world-class, renowned animal diagnostics lab right here in Florida, right here in Central Florida, in fact. So over in the St. Cloud area, we have the Charles Bronson Animal Diagnostics Laboratory, and they test a multitude of different diseases and things like that on a multitude of species. And they're really busy right now because of the pandemic situation, but they do a bunch of different tests. I know, for instance, for a necropsy, they can do a necropsy on birds that may have passed and you didn't know why. They'll do a necropsy on up to 5 birds for $50. So you can send them the 5 birds, and they'll do a test on them, running a complete necropsy analysis to see what their body was like whenever they perished, to be able to hopefully determine what may have caused that disease.
That's great. Thank you. Great info.
Thanks, JK. I've got one from Morgan, I believe. So what about bees? When you go to the hive, obviously I know I just remember people saying, don't run from a bee. Can they tell if you're scared?
I mean, the bees can definitely sense the changes in your behavior. So those quick movements alert them to something going on. And we kind of talked about using smoke to kind of stop them from being able to tell that you are there, stop them from communicating from each other, to give each other the signal that something weird is going on. So those quick movements are kind of just indicating like, oh, there's something weird here. So the bees get startled, they communicate that to each other. And for the same reason why we recommend, if you are going into the hive, you're not wearing like all dark clothing, because they think that's potentially a bear trying to get into the beehive. So that's kind of another trigger for them that something bad is about to happen. So wearing tan or lighter colored clothing is really preferred for that, again, to not startle them quite as much. So the quick movements, again, are just, you're disturbing the environment. There's more vibrations going on when you're moving faster, and the bees can tell that's going on. I know one of our local beekeepers here, he always says the bees know when you're nervous, so don't be nervous. And you tend to have a better time when you're calm, mostly because your movements are more controlled, more slow while you're doing it. But then also the bees can, to some degree, sense when you're shaky and you don't want to be there.
Thanks, Morgan.
Okay, we have kind of a follow-up question, I guess, for Norma here. From Georgette, are there any vegetables that are not good in big pots? Can you think of anything that would be a problem or difficult?
No, none that I can think of. If you have, depending on the pot that you have, you may just be able to put more inside there. I think the smaller pots would be a problem. So if you're trying to grow tomatoes, for example, and you're trying to put it in a very small pot, then that's a problem. But a big pot won't be a problem.
Yeah, I think I've grown just about everything in a container. And as long as the container is big enough and you have deep, good soil and you keep it watered, because container grown plants will dry out quicker than growing in the ground sometimes. So you have to keep an eye on that. You can grow pretty much any kind of vegetables in a container.
Yeah,
Make it attractive and productive.
and for me, Bill, the vegetables that I grow in containers at home mostly are tomatoes, peppers, and okra. And these are vegetables that usually are affected by root knot nematodes. And root knot nematodes, to put it in a simple way, are worm-like organisms that plug the plumbing system of the plant, so it restricts movement of water and nutrients. So your plants will not produce as well. But they're also, nematode resistant varieties. It doesn't mean that it's not going to get nematodes, but you'll still get good production, even if it comes down with it. So I use a combination of resistant varieties and also planting in pots. And when I put the pots on the ground, I have a plastic barrier there first. So that kind of prevents the nematodes from coming up. So it usually helps that I, get my crop to grow. And by the end of the growing season, I usually don't have much, if any, problem with root knot nematodes.
So that's not the same thing you squished on your plant in your garden, was it?
No, that was a caterpillar. that was a caterpillar. But yes, you have to be willing to squish the bugs when you see them. So that's when you're going out in your garden and you're inspecting and knowing which bugs are good and which bugs are bad. And don't be afraid to pick off those bad caterpillars when you see them and squish them. If you do that on a regular basis, you don't really have to spray anything. And I haven't sprayed any of my cool season vegetables yet.
And so if you missed session 1 of you need a DIY on how to squish the bugs, session 1 is it. I have a question for Maxine on what are the best fish for aquaponics?
Generally speaking, tilapia are going to be the best variety to go with. There's several different species. Depending on what county you're in, you may have to have a permit for them. But FWC's website is pretty clear on that. And I don't believe there's a charge for the permit. It's literally, you just have to fill out the paperwork so you can make sure they're aware of the location where the fish are going to be housed. I also did look up some information on the question we had earlier about aquaponics and strawberries. There are a few select growers that are growing strawberries in aquaponic systems, and it looks like crown rot is the big issue there. So excessive moisture getting into the fruit. But there are other species of fish that you can use in aquaponic systems. So brim, catfish, some bass species, and they actually have some saltwater species as well that can be done, but tilapia are the biggie.
So Maxine, if you could tell our listeners what FWC stands for.
I sure can. So FWC is Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So, and they would handle any kind of non-native species that you were going to house. They have an excellent website too. So myfwc.com, I can put it in the chat box.
And I have a question for Brittany. Brittany, I know that you're raising fish out behind the office. What kind of fish do you have out there?
In our aquaponic system here, we have catfish and we have mosquito fish. And the catfish are pretty simple and they're pretty cold hardy, so we don't do much to them.
And then what do mosquito fish do? Why should everybody like mosquito fish?
We throw mosquito fish in our aquaponic system as well as our salt marsh pond that we have just to make sure that we aren't breeding container mosquitoes here at our office.
And I know that in Hernando County, the county mosquito control department raises their own mosquito fish. And if you request it and contact them, they'll come out and give some to you. If you have a pond or I know for containers for livestock, water, And I'm sure that a number of counties do that, but you'd have to check with your individual county's mosquito control department. So they're definitely good fish. I have a question here for JK, another chicken question. William asks, are chickens from places like Tractor Supply or Rural King already vetted? How do you find places that can vaccinate your chickens specifically in Central Florida?
Right, so chickens that we chicks that we get from my stores such as Rural King or Tractor Supply. Depends on the provider is. I can't say for certain because it's entirely dependent upon the contract I have it with and what they're perceived for their chicks. I would ask them, and so because there's no way of really telling who their provider is. And as far as getting them vaccinated in the Central Florida area, it's a lot tougher when it comes or just general poultry vaccination. Vaccines are usually in doses or vials that have 500,000 a 10 dose vials because it's your commercial. So for small backyard situations, it's usually just not viable to retroactively evacuated. Contact a few of the poultry breeders in the Florida area and ask them if they have access to vaccines. But it's just you won't be able to find many, and if you do, chances are the only ones that you really find any sort of vaccine for is going to be against Barrett's disease because it usually does target some of those younger poultry. But outside of that, that's why you can't really find many vaccination situations for our backyard poultry areas. So that's why we really stress the preventative practices of backyard situations. We really try to prevent it because once it happens, it can be a little bit difficult to deal with after the fact.
Okay, and we have a question, I guess, for Maxine from a previous show here. I missed aquaponics. What's that?
That's a great question. So aquaponics is the combination of growing plants hydroponically or without soil. Could be a variety of different medias, but no soil media, and growing fish at the same time. And so the fish actually get fed and their poop fertilizes the plants, and it's a recycled system. So it's more water efficient and more nutrient efficient. So they've become very popular over the last decade.
Yeah, I know a lot of people really like the idea of being able to have a system where you have vegetables and fish. You're able to produce more, but you really need to know what you're doing. You can't just jump right into it. You need to do a little homework first. And kind of a follow-up one for Brittany. Mosquito fish, is that a breed of fish or a size?
It is a type of fish. It's a Gambusia is the genus. They are small little fish. They don't get too big, and they actually will feed on the mosquito larvae that are at the top of the water. The mosquito will lay its eggs, and they'll hatch into the little wiggly larvae, and they look tasty to those fish. So they have a turned up mouth that they're able to go and snatch them off the top of the water.
Okay, and it looks like we have at least one fan out here. Thank you so much, PJ. Wendy, do you have any other questions?
I do. Let's see. My lettuce tastes bitter. What is the problem?
So that's a common question that we get, lettuce tasting bitter or one of the greens tasting bitter. And that's because these are cool season crops. So if you're growing them under high temperature conditions, then they're likely to get bitter. The other thing is that if you leave them in the ground too long where they bolt, that means they're going to flower, then that will cause them to be bitter also. So you want to make sure you're not growing them when it's too hot. So when you have temperatures, over 70, 75, they'll tend to get bitter. Then if you wait too long to harvest, that happens. There are heat resistant varieties that you can plant if you want to plant in the spring. So look particularly for those if you're looking to plant lettuce in the spring.
Thank you, Norma. Morgan, did you have something to add on that one?
No, I just didn't know who was going to answer it, but beat me to that, and she did a great job. I don't have anything else to add.
All right, great. I got one more on gardening, and this could be for either of you. When should I get my vegetable garden started? I know spring is around the corner, so when should this happen?
Today.
I'll let you go,
Good answer.
Morgan.
Sorry, I'm not too much on the vegetable side. I do a lot more with our ag producers, but it depends on what you're growing. We're probably wrapping up our winter season around March. And then for vegetable gardening, I know there's a lot of classes going on right now, so it's probably time to get started.
Yeah, so for me, here in Central Florida, we recommend getting your vegetable garden in by March 15th. So that's usually when they say the danger of frost has passed. So March 15th, you should have your garden in at that time. If you put your garden in much later than that, you're going to likely encounter a lot more pest problems, or you're going to encounter, days when the temperature is too hot for your tomatoes to set fruit. So around March 15th is a good time to plant. Now, we have a publication that we shared with you last time when I was on, called the Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. So that divides the state into North, Central, and South Florida. I highly recommend you look at that publication to see, based on where you are, the recommended times to plant, and try and stick within that time frame, because the researchers at the University of Florida have done all the hard work to figure out, what conditions are best for you to have, the best harvest for your particular crop.
And Georgette has a question about romaine lettuce there.
Okay, I'm trying to see the question.
Okay, Georgette said, my romaine lettuce, I cut off the bottom and replanted, and it tasted bitter. So is regrowing not a good idea?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend regrowing that same lettuce. I would just pull that out and start afresh. Lettuce doesn't take very long to grow, and the seeds are very inexpensive. And you can do what we call direct seed lettuce, where you're just planting the seeds directly in the ground. And if you plant them too close, you can just, thin them out and replant the ones that you've removed. So yeah, there's no need for you to struggle with lettuce like that. Just start over.
Got a question about harvesting honey. How often do you harvest honey?
JK can probably chime in on this too, but it really depends on your goals and the time of the year too. You want to make sure the bees still have enough reserves to make it through the winter. So if they're producing enough that they still have enough honey to get them through the winter, you can harvest it. JK, you have anything else to add in there?
Yeah, that's pretty well it, Morgan. You can harvest honey whenever ever enough to make it worth your time and effort, because it's kind of a host to harvest honey. There's a lot of cleanup involved, a lot of prep involved. So to make it worth your while, you want to make sure that you're getting your honey out of it. So when it comes to harvesting honey, we don't always necessarily look individually at the box, but we look at individual frames. And what we say is we want to see at least 80% of that frame with capped honey. And once that frame is 80% with capped honey, you can go ahead and harvest it if you'd like. And if the rest of the frames in that box are 80% covered, that box is ready to go. But it's really going to depend upon the time of the year. It's going to depend upon the nectar flow. It all depends on if it's worth it to you to go ahead and make that harvest.
So while we're on the topic of honey, I'd like to ask the honey experts a question. So my favorite honey is wildflower honey. How do honeybee keepers determine the flavors of their honey?
That's a great question. So Honeybees, the honeybee that we deal with here in the United States, Apis mellifera, they're pretty unique in that they are very species-specific pollinators. So once that forage bee finds a specific flower that she likes, she prefers to go and try to find that species of flower for as long as she can. So, for instance, when we take our commercial beekeepers and they put their hives into an orange grove, you can feel pretty certain that all the honey that they're going to be collecting from all the nectar is going to be orange blossom honey. Now, as far as testing goes, you can get your honey tested, but it's very expensive, and I don't know of any commercial beekeepers who really do so. They're able to market it as a specific nectar source because they put their hives actually in the source of that nectar. When you're really not sure what your species of nectar are coming from, that's when you call it wildflower honey. So, Dr. Normally, your favorite honey could be from any source, just whatever local blooms you have in the area. Actually, as it turns out, so wildflower, that's what we have at our office because our master gardener society. They keep really good gardens and bloom all year round. So we got a lot of different blooms, a lot of different sources of nectar. So we get a bunch of wild.
So that just tells you I like mixes.
Morgan, did you have something to add?
The State Department does offer.
Sorry, I think JK's cutting out a little there at the end. No, I didn't have anything more to add, just that the famous wildflower honey is just such a mix of anything. It could be different depending on where you're located, what time of the year it is even. It's what those bees are searching for. And like JK had mentioned, if a commercial beekeeper is putting those bees in an area where there's only one thing flowering, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to market it and call it that type of honey. So our orange blossom honey is one he mentioned, and I've heard of others where if it's out in a blueberry field, they're getting blueberry honey from there as well.
So we have one last bee question here.
Right.
PJ asks, what does it take to get a beekeeper to have boxes on my property? And she is very rural.
The answer is connections and flowers. So the beekeepers are going to want to put their bees somewhere where there is a lot of things flowering, and things flowering at different times of the year too, especially if they're going to be leaving the hives there for a long period of time. So if you have a farm that has something flowering, they might potentially bring boxes out for that growing season. It'll help you with pollination, and it will also help them. They'll get honey out of it. Their bees will be happy for the fact that there's a lot of flowers in the area. But if you don't have those flowers, it'll be harder for someone to want to put boxes out there. I would encourage you to connect with your local beekeepers association, because that might be a good way to talk to people, especially individuals that might be looking for new locations to put hives. And again, if you have something that makes it a good location for those bees to be, that would encourage people to want to put a hive out in your area.
Okay, great. And we got a question from Maxine here. William bought a secondhand aquaponics system, and it came with tilapia already with it. Is there someone I can talk to about what type of tilapia species they are? So how do you figure out what kind of tilapia you have?
If there's any way to take photos of them, we can look at the markings on them and see if we can try to figure out which they are. They're probably blue tilapia, but they could also be Nile tilapia or something else, but blue tilapia is the most common.
Well, thanks, Maxine. I am dying to ask this question for Brittany. This blew my mind when we had her as our guest speaker on one of the previous sessions, is about scallop sitting, and who knew? But how can I join the Scallop Sitter program?
I will share a registration link with you. For here in Hernando, the requirements are that you live locally and that you're able to go out on a vessel one time per month minimum, and you check on your scallops every month between July and February. And yes, they are your kids and you're babysitting them. So you're responsible for making sure that you find the scallops, you put them in their cage, and you go and check on them once a month and make sure they're clean and healthy.
And I put a link to that in the chat box, and I've been busy putting all these different links in there. So everybody, if you get a chance, look through them and click on the links that are going to give you more information about how you can sign up for the Scallop Sitter program and learn about Salmonella and everything else in between.
And then JK had his listing for his upcoming classes also, monthly bee classes. Did we get that one in there?
Yes, I did. Somebody said that the link is not working. So
all right. We will get that fixed and
we will get that to you.
Send it out. Do we have time for one last question?
We have a comment.
All right.
PJ is going to go looking for Maxine because she's in Marion County also.
That sounds good. That'll be fun.
We want you guys to reach out to your local extension agents and extension faculty. All right. So I want to ask, this is for Yilin regarding water filters, and that was something that you covered in your session. If I have some type of water filter system, am I good to go?
That's a really good question. So most time people think I have a water filter, like they think it's good to go. But the answer is really depends. A, it's what's your water quality, and B, what kind of water filters do you have? So let's go back to the water quality. So if your water has bacteria and you are using a carbon filter, and which cannot remove the bacteria, which only increase the population of the bacteria in your water. So this answer is really depends. There's nothing like once for all. So what you need to do is to know your water quality. So if you are public utility, then you can request your water quality report from your utility provider. Often, because for public utility, it's water is safe to drink. It may have some analytes they are nuisance, so maybe not that pleasant, but it meet the safe drinking water standard, make sure it's safe to drink. And if you're on well, then I highly recommend you to find a state certified water lab to get your water tested. There's no comprehensive water testing, which means you cannot collect one water sample and get everything tested. So you will need to know what you want to test. So I highly suggest that you test bacteria, lead, and nitrate once a year to make these are the very basic water parameters. Get them tested, know your water quality. If you have any water issues, feel free to contact me or contact your local health department. So they will provide you more information.
Thank you, Yilin, and thank everyone for coming back to the end of this our winter series. And I think, Bill, you're going to give a teaser for our next session, our next round, or
yeah, we have a whole nother series planned out, don't we? And we're still in the process of arranging the speakers and putting together the flyer and putting it all up here on YouTube and on Facebook. But we do have another series of spring classes, and let me double check. That starts on March 4th, I believe. So once again, we're going to be on Friday mornings at 10 a.m. beginning March 4th. And I think on March 4th, we're going to be talking about spring vegetable gardening, and we're going to have Norma back here, and she's going to go out in her backyard and show us her garden once again. So that'll be great.
She's going to give us some specifics too, some really cool ways to garden, which I can't wait. We're going to talk about food waste. We're going to cover food preservation, horticulture therapy out in the garden, as well as mindfulness will be some other topics that we go into for the spring series. So if you guys have ideas or things that you want to know more about that we can ask our experts here in the Central District, we would love to hear from you. So you can email any of us. Bill, myself, or any of the experts you see here on the screen. And we will definitely try to incorporate that into one of our next seasons.
Sure. If you have any suggestions for anything that you'd like us to cover or talk about in the future, you can go ahead and put it in the chat box really quick. We're always looking for new ideas. And I'm looking forward to Norma finding another caterpillar in her backyard.
Agreed. And Bill, we did it, 11 o'clock. So thank you all.
That's called good time management.
That's right. That's right. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you being here today with us and sharing all things food systems here in the Central District. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone. And great questions, too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.